Maya stepped across the threshold, her bare feet silent against the familiar hardwood floors. The warmth hit her like a physical blow after hours in the December cold, and for a moment she swayed, gripping the doorframe with fingers that had gone white from more than just the weather. Everything was wrong, in the most terrifying way possible, because everything was right. Her architectural eye catalogued details automatically, a habit from her old life that 2 years of psychiatric medication hadn't quite erased. The Persian runner in the hallway, inherited from her great-grandmother, lay perfectly straight without a single thread out of place. The antique coat rack still held her red wool peacoat, the one she'd been wearing the last day she remembered clearly. Even the old grandfather clock in the corner ticked its familiar rhythm, though she was certain no one had been here to wind it. Maya moved deeper into the house, each step sending waves of recognition through her fractured memories. The living room appeared frozen in time, her grandmother's quilted throw draped over the wing-back chair, the chess set positioned mid-game exactly as she'd left it when playing against herself 2 years ago. The fire in the grate had burned down to glowing embers, but the warmth lingered, suggesting someone had been maintaining it recently. Very recently. A sharp kick from the baby made her gasp and clutch her swollen abdomen. The child had been restless during her escape from Millbrook, as if sensing her desperation. Maya had no memory of the pregnancy's beginning. That knowledge was locked away with everything else, from the months before her commitment. The doctors claimed trauma had fractured her mind, that she'd blocked out the psychotic episode that led to her hospitalization. But standing in this impossible preservation of her past, Maya felt the familiar burn of certainty that had once made her a brilliant architect. Something fundamental didn't align. She found the kitchen exactly as the hook had revealed, the crossword puzzle half finished in her grandmother's spidery handwriting, though Nai had died 3 years ago. Maya picked up the pencil lying beside it, noting how the tip still held graphite dust as if someone had just set it down. 7 across, deliberately forgotten. The answer spaces mocked her, 8 letters for a concept that had apparently consumed her life. The refrigerator hummed with life. Maya opened it with trembling hands to find fresh milk, eggs dated from this week, and a container of the congee her grandmother used to make when Maya was sick. The sight of it sent a sharp pain through her chest that had nothing to do with the baby's movements and everything to do with love and loss tangled beyond comprehension. Her phone buzzed. A cheap prepaid device she'd stolen from a nurse's station during her escape. No messages, but the timestamp read 11:47 p.m. By now, Millbrook would have discovered her missing from the evening bed check. They'd call her emergency contact, though Maya couldn't remember who that might be. Her parents had moved to Florida after committing her, claiming they couldn't bear to stay in Massachusetts after what she'd done. Her younger brother David lived in California and hadn't visited once during her institutionalization. Another kick from the baby, stronger this time, reminded her why she'd risked everything to come here. The doctors at Millbrook wanted her to sign adoption papers, claiming she was unfit for motherhood due to her mental state. They'd scheduled the signing for tomorrow, December 23rd, presenting it as a Christmas gift to some unnamed family who could provide stability she supposedly couldn't. But Maya remembered enough fragments to know she'd never wanted to give up her child. That certainty lived in her bones, unshakable despite the medications and therapy sessions designed to convince her otherwise. She'd escaped not just for answers about her past, but to reclaim her future. The dining room stopped her cold. Her drafting table sat positioned by the window exactly where she'd always kept it, and spread across its surface were architectural blueprints she recognized but didn't remember creating. The drawings showed renovation plans for this very house, detailed structural modifications she would have needed months to design. But according to her medical records, she'd been catatonic during the period when these drawings were apparently made. Maya leaned closer, studying the precise line work that was unmistakably hers. The blueprints showed plans to convert the basement into a separate living space, complete with reinforced walls and what appeared to be some kind of security system. In the margin, written in her own handwriting, were notes about ensuring privacy and preventing unwanted access. She had no memory of drawing any of it. The baby shifted again, and Maya felt a sudden urgency that went beyond her physical discomfort. Someone had been maintaining this house, keeping it perfectly preserved as if waiting for her return. Someone had been here recently enough to keep the fire burning and stock fresh groceries. Someone who knew she was coming. Maya's fingers traced the blueprint margins, her handwriting as familiar as her own heartbeat, yet completely alien. Phase 1. Secure perimeter. Phase 2. Install monitoring systems. Phase 3. Prepare safe room. The clinical precision of the notes chilled her more than the December wind still rattling the windows. She needed to understand what her life had been before Millbrook erased it. Moving carefully through the house, Maya began reconstructing the woman she'd apparently been, the one who'd drawn these plans with such methodical attention to security and isolation. In the kitchen, she found her old routine laid bare. The coffee maker was programmed for 6 a.m., exactly when she'd always started her days. Her favorite mug sat clean and ready beside it, the ceramic surface worn smooth where her thumb had habitually rested during long morning sessions at the drafting table. Even the sugar bowl held the exact ratio of raw sugar to honey crystals she preferred, a detail so specific that no one else could have known it. The baby kicked again, and Maya realized she was unconsciously cradling her belly the same way her grandmother had when pregnant with Maya's mother. Some gestures transcended memory, lived deeper than whatever trauma had stolen her past. She wondered what other fragments of herself remained intact beneath the psychiatric fog. Her phone buzzed with an unknown number. Maya stared at the screen, her finger hovering over the decline button. At Millbrook, phone calls had been rare privileges, monitored conversations with people who spoke to her like she was made of glass. But this felt different. Urgent in a way that made her chest tighten. "Maya?" The voice was male, familiar but distant. "Thank God. I've been trying to reach you for months. Who is this?" Her own voice sounded foreign after hours of silence during her escape. "It's Marcus, your partner at the firm." "Maya, where are you?" "The police called asking about your architectural files, and I didn't know what to tell them. Are you safe?" The name triggered a cascade of fragmented images, late nights in a downtown office, heated discussions over building codes, celebrations after winning major contracts. He'd been more than a business partner. She could feel the weight of unspoken history in his voice. She looked around the house that felt like both home and crime scene. "I'm trying to remember." "Jesus, Maya. When they said you were in Millbrook, I couldn't believe it. The woman I knew was brilliant, driven. You were going to revolutionize sustainable architecture. You had that commission from the Hartwell Foundation, the community center project that was going to put us on the map." The Hartwell Foundation. Something cold slithered down Maya's spine at the name, though she couldn't grasp why. What happened to the project? "That's what I've been trying to figure out. One day you were obsessing over the environmental impact reports, staying late every night. The next, your family called saying you'd had some kind of breakdown. They cleaned out your office, took all your files. Maya, you disappeared in the middle of the biggest contract we'd ever landed." Maya's free hand found the blueprint again, studying the security modifications with new understanding. "Marcus, did I ever mention feeling watched or threatened?" The silence stretched too long. "Maya, you became paranoid toward the end. You kept saying the Foundation's environmental assessments were falsified, that they were planning to build on contaminated land and cover it up. I thought it was just stress from the pregnancy and working alone after David moved away." David. Her brother's name sent another fragment floating to the surface. Arguments, his face tight with concern, accusations she couldn't quite recall. "What did my family tell you exactly?" "That you'd become delusional, started seeing conspiracies everywhere. They said you attacked someone during a meeting with the Hartwell Foundation, that you had to be sedated." Marcus's voice dropped. "But Maya, I knew you. You weren't violent. You were scared." The baby's movements had grown urgent, as if responding to Maya's rising anxiety. She remembered nothing about attacking anyone, but the blueprints suggested someone who'd been preparing for siege. Had she been losing her mind, or trying to protect herself from something real? Marcus, I need you to tell me about the last project, everything you remember about the Hartwell Foundation. Maya, maybe you should talk to your doctors first, if you're having memory issues. I escaped from Millbrook tonight. The words hung between them like a live wire. They wanted me to sign away my baby. Nothing they've told me makes sense, and this house, someone's been maintaining it like they expected me to return. She could hear Marcus moving around, the sound of papers shuffling. The address you gave the firm as your emergency contact. Is that where you are now? Maya froze. What emergency contact? Your grandmother's house in Greymont. You updated your employment records 6 months before your hospitalization, said it was your primary residence. Marcus paused. Maya, your grandmother died years ago. Why would you list an empty house? Because it wasn't empty, Maya realized with crystalline clarity. Someone had been keeping it ready for her return, maintaining the perfect recreation of her old life while she'd been locked away, medicated into compliance. The question wasn't why she'd listed this address, it was who had been waiting for her to come home. The line went dead in Maya's hand, but not before she heard something that made her blood freeze. The distant sound of car doors slamming through Marcus's phone, followed by his sharp intake of breath. Maya, there are people here asking about... Silence. She stared at the phone's blank screen, her reflection ghost-like in its surface. The baby kicked frantically now, as if sensing the shift in her body chemistry, the flood of adrenaline that came with understanding she'd just made a terrible mistake. By calling Marcus, by admitting where she was, she'd given someone exactly what they'd been waiting for. The grandfather clock chimed midnight with sonorous finality. December 23rd. In less than 24 hours, she was supposed to be signing adoption papers at Millbrook, surrendering her child to strangers while drugged into compliance. But someone had known she wouldn't be there. Someone had prepared this house like a trap disguised as sanctuary. Maya moved to the window, pulling back the lace curtains her grandmother had crocheted decades ago. The street stretched empty beneath pools of yellow lamplight, fog rolling in from the abandoned textile mills that had once made Greymont prosperous. Nothing moved in the December stillness, but she felt watched nonetheless, a familiar sensation that explained the security modifications in her blueprints. She'd felt hunted before. The paranoia Marcus had described wasn't delusion, it was recognition. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Welcome home, Maya. We need to talk." The simple message hit her like a physical blow. No signature, but the casual familiarity implied intimate knowledge of her situation. Someone had been monitoring her escape, tracking her movements, waiting for her to fulfill whatever purpose this elaborate charade served. Another text arrived immediately. "Check the basement. You'll find what you were looking for." Maya's hands shook as she read the words. She hadn't been looking for anything except answers, except her stolen life. But the text's confidence suggested she'd been following a script written by someone else, playing out predetermined moves in a game whose rules she didn't understand. The basement door stood at the end of the hallway, painted the same sage green her grandmother had favored throughout the house. Maya had avoided it during her initial exploration, drawn instead to the comforting familiarity of the main rooms. Now she realized the avoidance hadn't been random. Some buried instinct had warned her away from whatever lay below. The blueprints scattered across her drafting table suddenly made horrible sense. She hadn't been designing renovations, she'd been documenting changes that already existed. Someone had modified her grandmother's basement, and she'd been forced to create architectural plans as evidence or documentation. But evidence of what? Maya descended the creaking wooden steps, her phone's flashlight cutting through darkness that felt thick and expectant. The basement had been completely transformed from the dusty storage space she remembered. The walls were now finished drywall painted clinical white, and the concrete floor had been covered with industrial carpeting that muffled her footsteps. Professional lighting fixtures hung from the ceiling, currently dark but clearly expensive. Along one wall she found a bank of monitors and recording equipment that looked like something from a surveillance company. The screens were black, but red LED lights indicated the system was powered and potentially active. Her phone buzzed again. Press the blue button. Maya stared at the equipment, her architectural training warring with growing terror. Someone was controlling this experience, guiding her through discoveries like a museum docent, leading a tour through exhibits. But exhibits of what? Her own life. The blue button sat innocuously among a panel of controls that might have been designed by the same firm that equipped Millbrook's security systems. Maya's finger hovered over it. Understanding she faced a choice that would reshape everything. She could ignore the text, flee the house, disappear into the December night with her unborn child, and try to build a life from nothing. Or she could press the button and learn why someone had invested extraordinary effort in bringing her to this moment. The baby shifted restlessly, and Maya felt a sudden certainty that her child's future depended on whatever lay hidden in these recordings. The paranoia, the architectural plans, the perfectly maintained house, all of it pointed toward information someone had been desperate to preserve or suppress. Her finger touched the button. The monitors flickered to life, displaying a grid of camera feeds that showed every room in the house. But these weren't current images. The timestamps showed dates from 2 years ago, the weeks before her hospitalization. She watched herself moving through the rooms above, but this version of Maya looked haunted, constantly checking over her shoulder, covering windows, reinforcing locks. In one feed, she saw herself at the drafting table, but she wasn't drawing renovation plans. She was copying documents, photographing papers, creating what looked like evidence files with methodical desperation. The final monitor showed a recording labeled Emergency Backup, December 20th. Maya pressed play and watched her own face appear on screen, 8 months pregnant and terrified, speaking directly to the camera with urgent intensity. "If you're watching this," her recorded voice said, "then they succeeded in erasing my memory. But I found proof, and I hid it where only I would think to look." Maya's hand jerked away from the screen as if the monitor had burned her. The recording paused on her own face, a face she barely recognized beneath the wild fear that had consumed her 2 years ago. The woman on screen looked like a stranger wearing her features, someone who understood truths the current Maya couldn't grasp. She sank into the desk chair positioned before the monitors, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward. The basement felt smaller now, the white walls pressing closer as she struggled to process what she'd witnessed. That terrified woman had been her, speaking to a future self with desperate certainty about hidden proof and erased memories. But proof of what? And why couldn't she remember any of it? The baby kicked sharply, as if responding to her elevated heart rate. Maya pressed her palm against the movement, trying to ground herself in the present moment, but even that simple gesture felt foreign. Had she touched her belly the same way 2 years ago? Had she spoken to her unborn child in this same basement, promising protection she'd ultimately failed to provide? Her phone buzzed again, the sound making her flinch in the confined space. Another message from the unknown number: "Don't stop now. Your baby's life depends on remembering." The words hit her like a physical blow. Whatever game was being played, her child had become a pawn. Maya thought of the adoption papers waiting at Millbrook, the subtle pressure from doctors who claimed she was unfit for motherhood. Had that pressure been real concern for her mental state, or something more calculated? She reached toward the screen to resume the recording, then stopped. Once she heard what her past self had hidden, there would be no returning to ignorance. The woman she'd been for 2 years at Millbrook, medicated, compliant, slowly accepting the official version of her breakdown, would cease to exist. In her place would be someone with dangerous knowledge and no clear path forward. Maya's architectural training had taught her that some structural changes couldn't be undone. Remove the wrong support beam and the entire building might collapse. She sensed the same principle applied here. Some truths were load-bearing, holding up carefully constructed lies that powerful people needed to maintain. The basement's silence felt oppressive, broken only by the soft hum of electronic equipment and her own shallow breathing. Above her, the house waited with its perfect preservation of a life she couldn't remember choosing. Someone had invested enormous resources in maintaining this elaborate stage set, but for what performance? Another kick from the baby, stronger this time, accompanied by a sharp pain that reminded Maya of her physical limitations. She was 8 months pregnant, alone in an isolated house, with no allies except a recorded message from a version of herself she didn't trust. The doctors at Millbrook had spent 2 years convincing her that her own perceptions were unreliable, that her memories were compromised by trauma and chemical imbalance. What if they were right? What if the paranoid woman on screen represented everything dangerous about her untreated mind, and the proof she'd hidden was nothing more than the elaborate delusions of someone losing touch with reality? Maya's finger hovered over the play button again, but doubt flooded through her like ice water. The logical choice was to leave now, return to Millbrook before they noticed her absence, accept the medical care and structured life they offered. She could sign the adoption papers, let her child go to a stable family, and focus on her own recovery without the burden of motherhood she might not be equipped to handle. But even as the rational arguments lined up in her mind, her body rebelled against them. Some deeper instinct insisted that the woman on screen, terrified and desperate as she appeared, had been fighting for something real. The carefully maintained house, the fresh groceries, the monitoring equipment, all pointed to a conspiracy that transcended individual delusion. The phone buzzed once more. "They're coming. You have minutes, not hours." Maya's blood turned to ice. Through the basement ceiling, she heard something that hadn't been there moments before, the soft creak of footsteps on the front porch, so quiet they might have been mistaken for settling wood in an old house. But Maya knew these sounds intimately from childhood visits, and this was different, deliberate, careful. Someone was testing the lock. The choice she'd been wrestling with evaporated into immediate necessity. Whatever her past self had hidden, whoever was controlling this elaborate game, Maya's time for hesitation had expired. She could hear the front door opening now, the distinctive squeal of hinges she'd meant to oil during countless childhood summers. Her fingers stabbed the play button as footsteps moved through the rooms above, slow and methodical. The monitors flickered back to life, her recorded voice filling the basement with urgent whispers about environmental cover-ups, falsified documents, and a foundation willing to kill to protect their secrets. Maya pressed her hand against her mouth to stifle a gasp as the full horror of her situation crystallized. She wasn't recovering a lost life. She was inheriting a war that had never ended. The footsteps above moved with practiced familiarity, each creak of floorboard charting a methodical search pattern through rooms that had been her childhood sanctuary. Maya remained frozen in the desk chair, her recorded voice continuing its desperate monologue about environmental assessments and buried contamination reports, while strangers violated the space above her head. The Hartwell Foundation knew the groundwater was poisoned before they broke ground, her past self whispered from the speakers. 30 years of illegal dumping from Greymont textiles, and they planned to build a children's community center directly over the contamination. When I refused to falsify the architectural assessments, Maya's hand slammed down on the pause button as a voice drifted through the basement ceiling, calm, professional, terrifyingly familiar. "She's been here recently. Coffee's still warm. Dr. Elizabeth Kane." The voice belonged to Maya's primary psychiatrist at Millbrook, the woman who'd spent 2 years convincing her that paranoid delusions had destroyed her previous life. But Dr. Kane's presence in this house, in the middle of the night, speaking with casual authority about Maya's movements, shattered every carefully constructed explanation about concerned medical care and patient welfare. A second voice joined the first, younger and male. "Security feeds show she accessed the basement 20 minutes ago. She's found the recordings. Maya's throat constricted as understanding flooded through her like poison. The monitoring equipment wasn't just playback, it was active surveillance. Every step of her escape, every moment of discovery, had been watched and reported. They'd allowed her to flee Millbrook, guided her to this house, orchestrated her reunion with buried evidence. But why? The answer crystallized with horrible clarity as she heard Dr. Kane's next words, perfect. Let her absorb enough to commit fully, then we'll proceed with extraction. The adoption paperwork will be much easier to process if she's deemed an active fugitive rather than a patient. Maya's hand flew to her belly, protecting the child who had never been safe, even in her womb. The adoption wasn't medical recommendation, it was theft, legitimized through manufactured crisis. They'd allowed her to escape specifically to create grounds for declaring her an unfit fugitive, making the forced adoption legally unassailable. But her past self had known this would happen. The basement recordings weren't just evidence preservation, they were preparation for this exact moment. Maya's finger found a second blue button labeled contingency that she hadn't noticed before. The building plans scattered across the drafting table suddenly made perfect sense. Her architectural modifications hadn't been paranoid delusions, they'd been escape routes. She'd designed a way out of this trap 2 years ago, trusting her future self to understand when the time came to use it. Maya pressed the contingency button, and a section of the basement wall slid aside with mechanical precision, revealing a narrow passage that led toward the abandoned textile mills. Emergency lighting activated automatically, illuminating a corridor stocked with supplies and documents sealed in waterproof containers. Her recorded voice resumed automatically. If they've found you here, the tunnel leads to Mill Building C, basement level. Follow the red markers to the evidence cache. Maya, everything they told you about your breakdown was a lie designed to discredit what you discovered. Trust yourself. Trust what you built. The footsteps above had grown more urgent, and Maya heard Dr. Kane's voice again. She's not responding to surveillance. Move to basement containment. Maya hauled herself from the chair, her pregnant body protesting the sudden movement. There was no more time for hesitation, no more luxury of doubt. The woman she'd been at Millbrook, compliant, medicated, gradually accepting her supposed mental illness, had been a carefully constructed fiction designed to keep her neutralized while powerful people buried the truth about poisoned ground and dead children. But the woman who'd prepared this basement had refused to surrender. She'd preserved evidence, built escape routes, and trusted that her future self would choose flight over submission when the moment arrived. Maya grabbed the emergency bag from the tunnel entrance and felt its weight, heavy enough to suggest serious preparation. Her past self had known this night would come, had engineered her own rescue across 2 years of enforced amnesia. The basement door above creaked open, and Dr. Kane's voice carried down the stairwell. Maya, there's no need to run. We're here to help you through this crisis. But Maya was already moving through the tunnel, following red markers toward whatever truth had been worth 2 years of her life to protect. Behind her, she could hear shouts of discovery as they found the open passage, but she'd gained precious minutes of lead time. The tunnel stretched ahead into darkness, carrying her away from the lie she'd been living and toward a war she'd apparently been fighting long before she'd understood the stakes. There was no going back now, not to Millbrook, not to manufactured compliance, not to the comfortable delusion that powerful institutions existed to protect rather than exploit. Maya Chen was no longer a patient or a victim. She was a woman with dangerous knowledge, moving toward a confrontation that would determine whether truth or conspiracy would claim her child's future. The tunnel stretched longer than Maya had anticipated, each step deeper into the abandoned mill complex, increasing the distance between her and the voices echoing from her grandmother's basement. The emergency lighting cast eerie shadows on concrete walls that wept with decades of moisture, and the air carried the metallic taste of rust and decay that permeated everything in Greymont's industrial graveyard. Her phone buzzed again, the sound amplified by the tunnel's acoustics. A new message, Building C, second sublevel. Package waiting at coordinates you'll recognize. Maya paused, pressing her back against the cold wall as another contraction gripped her abdomen. Not labor, but stress and exhaustion taking their toll on her pregnant body. The baby had grown restless, responding to her elevated heart rate and the adrenaline flooding her system. She forced herself to breathe deeply, knowing panic would only cloud the judgment she desperately needed. The red markers led her through a maze of service tunnels that connected the mill buildings like arteries in some massive dying organism. Her architectural training helped her navigate by visualizing the layout from above, but the underground passages revealed modifications that hadn't appeared in any historical blueprints she'd studied. Someone had been using these tunnels for years, maintaining and expanding them for purposes that had nothing to do with textile production. When Maya finally emerged into Mill Building C's basement, the space took her breath away. What should have been a decrepit storage area had been transformed into something resembling a war room. Tables lined the walls, covered with documents, photographs and maps that chronicled decades of environmental crimes. Computer equipment hummed quietly in one corner, and she recognized the same surveillance monitors that had filled her grandmother's basement. But she wasn't alone. A woman emerged from the shadows near the computer station, elderly, perhaps 70, with steel grey hair and the weathered hands of someone who'd spent years handling physical evidence. She moved with purpose despite her age, and her eyes held the sharp intelligence Maya remembered from her grandmother's generation. "You made good time," the woman said, her voice carrying a slight accent Maya couldn't place. "I wasn't certain you'd remember the architectural modifications clearly enough to navigate the tunnels." Maya stared, her mind struggling to process this development. "Who are you?" "Dr. Sarah Kovac. I was Greymont's environmental health officer until the Hartwell Foundation had me removed in 1998. Your past self reached out to me 2 years ago when she uncovered the contamination reports." The woman gestured toward the evidence-covered tables. She knew they'd eventually erase her memories, so she made sure someone else could continue the work. The revelation hit Maya like ice water. Her paranoia hadn't been delusion. She'd been building a network, creating redundancy in case the conspiracy succeeded in silencing her. "You've been maintaining all this?" "Your grandmother's house, the tunnel systems, the evidence preservation. Maya, you didn't just stumble onto corporate malfeasance, you uncovered a 30-year cover-up that reaches into state environmental agencies, hospital administration, and family court systems." Dr. Kovac moved to one of the tables and lifted a thick folder. "The Hartwell Foundation has been systematically silencing environmental whistleblowers by having them committed to psychiatric facilities." Maya's legs nearly gave out as the full scope of her situation crystallized. How many others? 17 documented cases over 2 decades. Architects, environmental scientists, public health officials, anyone who threatened their development projects. They've refined the process, manufacture a crisis, document erratic behavior, initiate psychiatric holds that become indefinite commitments. The older woman's voice hardened. "Your pregnancy was a gift to them. Hormonal imbalances, maternal anxiety, postpartum psychosis, so many medical explanations for inconvenient behavior." Another contraction gripped Maya's abdomen, stronger this time, and Dr. Kovac immediately moved to support her. "We need to get you out of Greymont tonight. I have contacts in Vermont who can provide safe medical care until you deliver. But the evidence will survive with or without you. Your job now is protecting that child." Dr. Kovac guided Maya toward a different exit, where Maya could see a vehicle waiting in the loading dock. "The Foundation expects you to stay and fight for the truth. They're prepared for that scenario. What they can't handle is you disappearing completely with evidence they can't control." Maya hesitated, every instinct screaming that running away meant abandoning the fight her past self had sacrificed everything to wage. But as another wave of pain reminded her of her physical limitations, she realized Dr. Kovac was right. The woman who'd built these tunnels and preserved this evidence had been thinking beyond her own survival. She'd been preparing for the possibility that winning might require strategic retreat. Her phone buzzed one final time as they reached the vehicle. Trust Sarah. Your daughter's future depends on reaching tomorrow. Maya stared at the screen, her heart stopping. Her daughter. Somehow, the anonymous contact knew details about her pregnancy that even the medical staff hadn't shared. But instead of terror, she felt a strange sense of completion, as if puzzle pieces were finally clicking into place. She was no longer just fighting for abstract truth or personal vindication. She was fighting for a daughter who deserved to grow up in a world where powerful institutions couldn't simply erase inconvenient people. The old sedan's engine rattled to life in the mill's loading dock, its headlights cutting through fog that seemed to thicken by the minute. Maya settled into the passenger seat, Dr. Kovac's weathered hands steady on the steering wheel, despite the gravity of their situation. As they pulled away from Mill Building C, Maya watched the complex recede into darkness, knowing she might never return to the place where her past self had waged a war she was only beginning to understand. How far to Vermont? Maya asked, pressing her hand against her belly as the baby shifted restlessly. The contractions had subsided, but an underlying tension remained, her body's constant reminder that time was running short. 3 hours if the roads stay clear, 4 if this fog gets worse. Dr. Kovac navigated the narrow service road with practiced familiarity, but we're not going straight there. First, we need to make a stop. Maya tensed. Where? Your past self left something for you. A final recording, separate from the basement cache. She knew you'd need more than just evidence to understand what you're truly fighting against. The older woman's voice carried a weight that made Maya's stomach clench. She made it 2 days before they took her to Millbrook. By then, she knew they were coming. They drove through Greymont's abandoned downtown, past the skeletal remains of the old textile district where Maya's grandmother had worked decades before the contamination turned the groundwater toxic. Street lights flickered intermittently, casting ghostly shadows on empty storefronts and boarded windows. The town felt like a monument to systematic poisoning, a place where corporate greed had literally killed the earth beneath people's feet. Dr. Kovac turned into the parking lot of what had once been Greymont Community Hospital, now a hollow shell of broken windows and rusted medical equipment. She hid it in the old radiology department, somewhere the Hartwell Foundation's surveillance couldn't reach. Maya's chest tightened with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Each revelation about her past self painted a picture of a woman who'd been methodical in her preparation for erasure, thinking steps ahead of enemies who controlled hospitals, courts, and government agencies. But it also reinforced how completely Maya had been severed from her own life, how thoroughly the woman she'd been at Millbrook had been manufactured to replace someone far more dangerous. They entered the hospital through a service entrance that Dr. Kovac opened with a key she produced from her coat pocket. The hallways reeked of mold and decay, their footsteps echoing off cracked tile floors as emergency flashlights guided them deeper into the abandoned building. Medical equipment lay scattered like the bones of some massive creature, and Maya found herself wondering how many other victims of the Hartwell Foundation's conspiracy had been treated in these rooms. The old radiology department occupied the hospital's basement level, its lead-lined walls creating a natural electromagnetic dead zone. Dr. Kovac led Maya to what had been the chief radiologist's office, where a small digital recorder sat on a desk covered with 20-year-old medical journals. She said you'd know when you were ready to hear this, Dr. Kovac said, stepping back to give Maya privacy. But Maya, once you press play, there's no returning to the woman you were at Millbrook. This recording will change everything about how you see yourself and what you're capable of. Maya stared at the device, understanding that this moment represented a final threshold. The woman she'd been for 2 years at Millbrook, confused, medicated, gradually accepting her supposed mental illness, had been a careful construction designed to keep her neutralized. But that woman had also been safe, protected from responsibilities and dangers that could destroy both her and her unborn child. Her phone buzzed. They've discovered the tunnel exit. You have minutes." The decision crystallized with brutal clarity. Maya pressed play, and her own voice filled the abandoned office, but not the desperate whisper from the basement recordings. This voice carried steel resolve and terrifying certainty. "Maya, if you're hearing this, they've already taken everything from you except the one thing they can't steal, your ability to choose who you become next. I know you're scared. I know you want to protect our daughter by surrendering, by accepting their version of reality, but I need you to understand something about the woman you really are." Dr. Kovac moved to the window, watching for approaching vehicles, while Maya absorbed words that felt like messages from another planet. "You're not a victim of corporate conspiracy. You're the architect of their destruction. Everything they've done to silence you has only given us more evidence, more documentation of their methods. The pregnancy they think makes you vulnerable. It's given us legal standing to demand protection for our child that will expose their entire operation." Maya's hands trembled as the full scope of her past self-strategy became clear. She hadn't just been gathering evidence. She'd been building a case that would require the very institutions they controlled to choose between protecting her child and protecting the conspiracy. The recording continued, but Maya barely heard it over the sound of vehicles approaching the hospital. The final phase of her escape was beginning, and she was no longer the same woman who'd fled Millbrook 12 hours earlier. The vehicles surrounded the abandoned hospital within minutes, their headlights turning the fog into a wall of blazing white that made escape impossible. Maya's recorded voice continued speaking from the device, but the words felt distant now, overshadowed by the immediate reality of capture. Through the radiology department's grimy windows, she could see black SUVs positioning themselves at every exit, their occupants moving with military precision. "They found us too quickly," Dr. Kovac whispered, her weathered face grim in the flashlight's glow. "Someone's been tracking us since we left the mill." Maya's heart hammered as the full trap revealed itself. Her phone, the anonymous contact who'd been guiding her escape, hadn't been helping her evade capture. It had been herding her toward this moment, ensuring she'd be cornered with the evidence that could destroy her credibility forever. The Hartwell Foundation hadn't been chasing her, they'd been orchestrating her capture. Heavy footsteps echoed through the hospital's main corridor, growing louder as multiple teams converged on their location. Maya pressed her hands against her belly, feeling the baby respond to her terror with agitated movement. Everything her past self had prepared, every contingency plan and hidden cache, had led to this, facing her greatest fear while 8 months pregnant and trapped in a building that reeked of institutional death. "Maya Chen." The voice carried through the basement with calm authority, not Dr. Kane this time, but someone whose confidence suggested they'd been planning this confrontation for months. "We know you're here. We know about the recordings, the evidence, Dr. Kovac's assistance. It's time to end this before someone gets hurt." The recorded voice on the device continued. "The moment they corner you, Maya, remember that fear is their primary weapon. They need you to believe you're helpless, that protecting our daughter requires surrender. But the truth is exactly the opposite." Maya stared at Dr. Kovac, whose steady hands were now trembling slightly as the footsteps grew closer. What did she mean? What am I supposed to do? "Your past self discovered something about the Foundation's legal vulnerabilities," Dr. Kovac whispered urgently. "The conspiracy only works if their victims remain silent, but a pregnant woman being forcibly committed while presenting evidence of environmental crimes, that creates media attention they can't control." The basement door burst open, and figures in tactical gear descended the stairs with flashlights and weapons drawn. Maya found herself pressed against the lead-lined wall, Dr. Kovac stepping protectively in front of her as armed men filled the radiology department. Behind them came a woman in an expensive coat, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the late hour and weather conditions. "Dr. Margaret Hartwell," Dr. Kovac said, her voice carrying decades of suppressed anger. "Still cleaning up your family's messes personally?" Maya's breath caught. The woman before her carried herself with the assured bearing of inherited power, but her eyes held the calculating coldness of someone who'd built a career on silencing inconvenient truths. This wasn't just another corporate executive. This was the architect of the entire conspiracy, the person who'd turned psychiatric medicine into a weapon against whistleblowers. "Maya, you're in active labor," Dr. Hartwell said, her tone suggesting maternal concern while her security team maintained tactical positions. "Your stress levels are endangering both you and your child. Let us provide the medical care you desperately need." "I'm not," Maya began, but another contraction gripped her abdomen, stronger than before, forcing her to lean against the wall for support. The baby had dropped lower in the past hour, and her body was responding to the combination of physical exhaustion and psychological terror in ways that made denial impossible. Dr. Hartwell stepped closer, her voice becoming hypnotically reasonable. "You've been off your medications for 36 hours. The paranoid delusions are intensifying, making you believe that people trying to help you are enemies. This elaborate fantasy about corporate conspiracies, it's a symptom of your condition, not reality." Maya felt the familiar pull of surrendering to medical authority, the same psychological pressure that had kept her compliant at Millbrook for 2 years. But her recorded voice continued playing. "When they try to gaslight you, Maya, remember the evidence. Remember the documents, the photographs, the contamination reports. Remember that sane people don't build escape tunnels and evidence caches unless they're fighting something real." The contraction peaked and subsided, leaving Maya breathless but mentally clearer than she'd been in hours. Looking at Dr. Hartwell's perfectly composed face, she understood with crystalline certainty that this woman had orchestrated the systematic destruction of dozens of lives, turning medical institutions into instruments of corporate protection. "You killed children," Maya said, her voice carrying across the basement with surprising strength. "You poisoned the groundwater and then silenced everyone who tried to expose it." Dr. Hartwell's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. A flicker of recognition that her quarry was no longer the broken woman from Millbrook's psychiatric ward. Maya Chen had remembered who she really was, and the ordeal that would determine her daughter's future was finally beginning. Dr. Hartwell's mask of maternal concern dissolved completely, replaced by the cold calculation of a predator whose prey had unexpectedly shown teeth. She gestured to her security team, and Maya watched in horror as they moved to restrain Dr. Kovac, zip-tying her wrists behind her back with practiced efficiency. "Sarah, you're being arrested for aiding and abetting a psychiatric patient's escape, breaking and entering, and conspiracy to commit fraud," Dr. Hartwell said, her voice now carrying the authority of someone accustomed to wielding institutional power like a scalpel. "The state will be reviewing your continued medical license." "No!" Maya lunged forward, but another massive contraction doubled her over, sending waves of pain through her pelvis that made her vision blur. When she looked up, Dr. Kovac was already being escorted toward the stairs, her eyes meeting Maya's with an expression of profound regret. "I'm sorry," the older woman whispered as they pulled her away. "She planned for everything except this." Maya's recorded voice continued playing from the device, but Dr. Hartwell calmly walked over and switched it off, then slipped the recorder into her coat pocket. The evidence that had seemed so powerful moments before disappeared as easily as everything else Maya had tried to hold on to. Her memories, her house, her identity, her freedom. "The tunnels have been sealed," Dr. Hartwell said, studying Maya's face for signs of breaking. "The mill building will be demolished tomorrow morning. Your grandmother's house is being prepared for new tenants who won't share your family's unfortunate tendency toward paranoid ideation." Each word hit Maya like a physical blow. Everything her past self had built, the hidden caches, the escape routes, the carefully preserved evidence, was being systematically erased even as she stood there. The architectural modifications that had taken months to construct would be rubble before her daughter was born. "The woman you think you were never existed," Dr. Hartwell continued, her tone taking on the hypnotic quality of a therapist guiding a patient toward acceptance. "Maya Chen, the environmental activist, the crusading architect, the brilliant investigator. She was a delusion created by your deteriorating mental state during pregnancy. The real Maya Chen is a woman struggling with severe psychiatric illness who needs help. Maya pressed her back against the lead-lined wall, fighting waves of pain and the insidious pull of surrendering to an explanation that would make everything stop hurting. For 2 years at Millbrook, she'd been taught that accepting her illness was the path to healing. Fighting against medical authority had only brought more restrictions, more medications, more isolation. Her phone buzzed one final time, and Maya looked down to see a message that made her blood freeze. Tracking successful. Patient located and contained. Initiating transport protocol. The anonymous contact hadn't been helping her escape. It had been the Foundation's surveillance system, using her desperate need for guidance to herd her exactly where they wanted her. Every decision she'd thought was her own, breaking into the house, finding the tunnels, trusting Dr. Kovac, had been carefully orchestrated to lead her to this moment of complete defeat. "Your phone's GPS has been active since you left Millbrook," Dr. Hartwell explained, watching Maya's face crumble as the full scope of the manipulation became clear. "We needed you to find the evidence caches so we could eliminate them permanently. We needed you to identify Dr. Kovac so we could address her continued interference. You've been very helpful in cleaning up these loose ends." Another contraction gripped Maya, stronger than before, and she felt moisture between her legs that made her gasp. Her water had broken. Labor was beginning whether she was ready or not, and her daughter would be born into a world where the truth had been systematically erased. "The ambulance is waiting," Dr. Hartwell said, her voice returning to its false gentleness. "We'll take excellent care of you both. Your daughter will grow up believing her mother recovered from mental illness through proper medical treatment. She'll never know about conspiracies or cover-ups or any of the delusions that destroyed your family." Maya stared at the woman who'd orchestrated the theft of her entire life, understanding with devastating clarity that she'd lost everything that mattered. Her memories had been compromised by medications and psychological manipulation. Her evidence had been destroyed or confiscated. Her allies had been neutralized. Even her phone, her last connection to resistance, had been a weapon used against her. The security team moved to escort her upstairs, their grip gentle but implacable. Maya's legs could barely support her weight as labor intensified, her body betraying her just as thoroughly as everything else. She thought of her daughter, who would be born into captivity and raised to believe that fighting powerful institutions was a symptom of madness rather than a moral imperative. As they guided her toward the hospital's exit, Maya caught one final glimpse of the abandoned radiology department where her past self's voice had spoken of victory and vindication. Now it looked exactly like what it was, a tomb for failed resistance, a place where hope came to die in the darkness. The ambulance doors slammed shut with the finality of a prison cell, but Maya barely heard them over the roar of realization flooding her mind. As the vehicle pulled away from the abandoned hospital, she stared at Dr. Hartwell's satisfied face and felt something shift inside her, not just the baby moving, but a fundamental understanding that changed everything she thought she knew about her situation. "You made a mistake," Maya said quietly, her voice cutting through the hum of medical equipment. Dr. Hartwell raised an eyebrow, checking her phone with the casual confidence of someone who'd orchestrated dozens of similar captures. "Maya, you're experiencing what we call cognitive dissonance. Your mind is struggling to accept reality." But Maya wasn't listening anymore. The pieces were falling into place with crystalline clarity, and what she saw made her almost laugh at the elaborate performance she'd been watching. "You don't know where the real evidence is." The slight tightening around Dr. Hartwell's eyes confirmed it. Maya pressed on, her labor pains suddenly feeling less like weakness and more like a countdown timer. "Everything you just destroyed, the tunnels, the recordings, even Dr. Kovac's arrest, you did it because you're terrified. You have no idea what I actually discovered." "Your delusions are becoming more elaborate," Dr. Hartwell said, but her voice lacked its earlier certainty. Maya leaned forward despite another contraction, understanding with perfect clarity why her past self had been so methodical about preparing for capture. The woman you've been chasing doesn't exist. The Maya Chen who hid evidence in obvious places, who trusted phone contacts, who led you to convenient locations, she was a performance. The revelation hit her like lightning. Her past self hadn't just prepared for erasure. She'd created an entirely false trail of evidence and escape routes designed to be discovered. While the Foundation had been systematically destroying decoy caches and sealing fake tunnels, the real investigation had been happening somewhere else entirely. "I never hid anything in that basement," Maya continued, watching Dr. Hartwell's composure crack slightly. "The tunnel system was a distraction. The recordings were breadcrumbs. Even my pregnancy, you think it makes me vulnerable, but it's actually my greatest protection." Dr. Hartwell's phone buzzed urgently, and Maya caught the flash of panic that crossed her face as she read the message. Something was happening outside their carefully controlled narrative, something the Foundation hadn't anticipated. The real Maya Chen wasn't gathering evidence, Maya said, the full scope of her past self strategy finally becoming clear. She was creating legal standing. Every medication you forced on me at Millbrook, every falsified psychiatric evaluation, every forged document, it's all been meticulously documented through proper legal channels. Another contraction gripped her, but this time Maya felt her daughter's movement as encouragement rather than distress. The baby wasn't just arriving, she was arriving at exactly the right moment, when her birth would trigger protections that Dr. Hartwell couldn't circumvent. "You see, the moment my daughter is born, she becomes a ward whose mother is being held against her will by the same medical system that's been chemically restraining her for 2 years, Maya continued, her voice growing stronger as understanding deepened. "That triggers mandatory state oversight that your Foundation can't control." Dr. Hartwell was speaking rapidly into her phone now, her mask of authority dissolving into something approaching desperation. Maya could hear fragments: legal complications, media exposure, need to accelerate. The ambulance's route was wrong. They weren't heading toward Millbrook or any legitimate medical facility. Maya realized with a chill that she was being taken somewhere. The Foundation could ensure her daughter's birth occurred entirely within their control, away from mandatory reporters and legal oversight. But as another massive contraction hit, Maya felt something her captors couldn't have anticipated. Her water breaking wasn't just the beginning of labor, it was the activation of a legal time bomb her past self had planted years earlier, before the first commitment, before the first injection of psychiatric medications. "My grandmother didn't just leave me a house," Maya said, looking directly at Dr. Hartwell's increasingly panicked face. "She left me a legal trust that activates when I give birth, a trust that requires independent medical oversight and automatically triggers environmental protection lawsuits if anything happens to me or my daughter." The phone calls in the ambulance were becoming frantic now. Maya understood that somewhere across the state, legal proceedings were beginning that the Hartwell Foundation couldn't stop, documents were being filed that they couldn't suppress, and media attention was being generated that they couldn't control. The woman who'd been committed to Millbrook 2 years ago hadn't been a victim. She'd been bait, designed to draw out the full scope of the conspiracy while her real work continued through legal channels they never suspected existed. Maya Chen hadn't just been gathering evidence, she'd been building a trap so comprehensive that her own capture would trigger its activation. As the ambulance sped through the December night toward whatever facility Dr. Hartwell hoped would contain this crisis, Maya finally understood the truth about herself. She hadn't escaped from Millbrook, she'd graduated from it, having served her time as the Foundation's prisoner while her real self waited to be reborn in this moment of apparent defeat. Her daughter was coming, and with her, the reckoning that would destroy everything the Hartwell Foundation had built on the graves of poisoned children. The ambulance lurched to a sudden stop, and Maya heard Dr. Hartwell's sharp intake of breath as she stared at her phone screen. Through the small rear window, Maya could see flashing lights, not medical vehicles, but police cars forming a roadblock across the narrow country road. "What is this?" Dr. Hartwell demanded into her phone, but Maya was already smiling through her contraction as understanding bloomed fully. The ambulance doors opened from the outside, revealing not more security personnel but a tall woman in an FBI windbreaker, her badge clearly visible in the swirling snow. Behind her stood uniformed officers and what looked like federal marshals, their breath steaming in the December cold. "Dr. Margaret Hartwell, you're under arrest for conspiracy, kidnapping, and violations of federal environmental protection statutes," the agent announced, stepping into the ambulance with practiced authority. "Maya Chen, I'm Special Agent Rebecca Torres. We've been waiting for your signal." Maya felt tears of relief streaming down her face as another powerful contraction gripped her. "The trust," she gasped. It activated. 47 minutes ago, Agent Torres confirmed, helping Maya shift to a more comfortable position. "Your grandmother's legal team has been monitoring your situation for 2 years, waiting for the birth trigger. The moment your daughter's arrival became imminent, sealed federal warrants were automatically unsealed." Dr. Hartwell was being read her rights, her earlier composure completely shattered. Maya watched the woman who'd controlled every aspect of her life for 2 years being handcuffed with a satisfaction that made the labor pains feel almost manageable. "There's a real medical team en route," Agent Torres explained, checking Maya's pulse with gentle efficiency. "Dr. Sarah Kovac is with them. She was never actually arrested. She's been working with federal prosecutors since she first suspected the Foundation's activities." The revelation hit Maya like a warm wave. Dr. Kovac's capture had been as orchestrated as everything else, but this time the performance had been for the Foundation's benefit rather than her own destruction. "How long have you known?" "Your past self contacted us 18 months ago," Agent Torres said, monitoring Maya's breathing as contractions intensified. She couldn't risk direct communication while under psychiatric hold, but she found ways to get information to her grandmother's attorneys. They've been building the federal case ever since. Maya heard the approaching sirens of legitimate emergency vehicles, their sound completely different from the Foundation's false rescue operation. A daughter was coming fast now, labor progressing with an urgency that matched the unfolding liberation around her. "The environmental contamination evidence?" Maya asked between breaths. "Preserved through proper legal channels and corroborated by EPA investigators," Agent Torres confirmed. "Your architectural documentation of the mill building's structural modifications revealed an illegal waste disposal system that's been poisoning groundwater for 15 years. 43 children's deaths are now being investigated as potential homicides." A real ambulance arrived, its crew led by a young paramedic who immediately began assessing Maya's condition with the professional care she'd been denied for so long. Dr. Kovac appeared moments later, her face glowing with relief and determination. "Maya, how are you feeling?" Dr. Kovac asked, taking her hand with the warmth of genuine medical concern. "Your daughter's decided she wants to be born into freedom." Maya squeezed the doctor's fingers as another contraction peaked, this one bringing a pressure that meant birth was imminent. "She planned it perfectly," she whispered, understanding now that even her baby's timing had been part of a larger design. "My past self knew exactly when to set everything in motion." The real ambulance was equipped with proper obstetric equipment, and Maya felt the profound difference between genuine medical care and the Foundation's controlling manipulation. As they transferred her to the new vehicle, she caught a glimpse of Dr. Hartwell being led away in federal custody, the woman's empire crumbling with each passing moment. "The Millbrook facility is being raided right now," Dr. Kovac reported, monitoring the baby's heartbeat with equipment that actually worked for Maya's benefit rather than against it. 47 patients who were committed under questionable circumstances are getting independent psychiatric evaluations. Maya's phone, her real phone, not the Foundation's tracking device, buzzed with a message from her grandmother's attorney, trust fully activated. Environmental lawsuits filed in federal court. Media briefings begin at dawn. Your daughter will inherit justice." As the ambulance sped toward a hospital where she would actually receive care rather than captivity, Maya felt her body preparing for the final stage of labor. Her daughter was crowning, demanding entrance into a world that had suddenly become safe for truth-tellers and whistleblowers. "I remember everything now," Maya gasped as the baby's head appeared. "I remember who I really am." The woman who'd been erased, medicated, and controlled was gone forever. In her place was Maya Chen, environmental crusader, whose apparent defeat had been the most complete victory imaginable. Her daughter's first breath would be drawn in freedom, witnessed by federal agents and genuine medical professionals who answered to law rather than corporate power. The Hartwell Foundation's reign of silence was ending, one contraction at a time. The baby's cry pierced the ambulance with fierce, defiant strength, a sound that announced not just birth, but revolution. Maya held her daughter against her chest, feeling the tiny heartbeat that had driven every decision of the past 2 years, even the ones she couldn't remember making. "She's perfect," Dr. Kovac whispered, tears streaming down her face as she completed the delivery. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and lungs that could wake the dead. Maya stared at her daughter's face, red, wrinkled, absolutely furious at being thrust into existence, and felt the final pieces of her fragmented memory clicking into place. This child wasn't just her daughter. She was living evidence, a witness whose very existence would testify to the timeline the Hartwell Foundation had tried to erase. "The father," Maya said suddenly, her voice hoarse from labor. "I remember him now. David Martinez, the EPA investigator who first identified the contamination patterns. They killed him, didn't they?" Agent Torres nodded grimly. "Car accident, supposedly. 3 days after he filed his preliminary report about Greymont's water table. Your relationship with him is what first put you on their radar." The ambulance pulled into the hospital, a real hospital, with actual emergency protocols and genuine medical oversight. As they wheeled Maya through corridors that smelled of antiseptic rather than institutional control, she felt the weight of everything that was ending and everything that was beginning. Her daughter's small fist wrapped around Maya's finger with surprising strength, and in that grip, Maya felt the commitment she'd been building toward through every terrifying moment of the past weeks. This wasn't over. Dr. Hartwell's arrest was just the beginning of what she needed to finish. "I want to testify," Maya announced as they transferred her to the delivery room for post-birth care. "Against all of them. The Foundation, Millbrook, every doctor who participated in the cover-up. I want my daughter to grow up knowing her mother didn't just survive their system. She dismantled it." Dr. Kovac squeezed her shoulder. "Maya, you've been through extraordinary trauma. The federal prosecutors will need your testimony, but they can wait until you've recovered." But Maya was already shaking her head, her mind crystal clear despite physical exhaustion. "No. Every day we delay gives them time to destroy more evidence, to silence more witnesses, to hurt more families. I've spent 2 years in captivity. I'm not spending another day letting them regroup." The consequences of her earlier choices were becoming visible through the hospital room window. News vans were gathering in the parking lot, their satellite dishes reaching toward a sky that was finally clearing of snow. The story was breaking faster than anyone could contain it. Environmental activist Maya Chen, presumed mentally ill, giving birth to evidence that would reshape how the world understood corporate power and psychiatric control. Agent Torres returned with updates that made Maya's resolve crystallize further. 17 Millbrook staff members have been arrested. We've uncovered evidence of similar operations in 4 other states. This isn't just about Greymont anymore. It's a national conspiracy. Maya looked down at her daughter, who was nursing with the same fierce determination she'd shown in being born. This child would grow up in a world where her mother's apparent madness had revealed institutional corruption that most people couldn't even imagine existed. "There's something else," Agent Torres continued, her voice careful. "We've found evidence that your commitment to Millbrook wasn't the Foundation's first attempt at silencing you. They tried to have you committed once before, 6 months earlier. It didn't work because you had legal representation. The memory surfaced with startling clarity. The lawyer her grandmother had hired, the psychiatric evaluation that had cleared her, the brief period when she'd thought she'd won. But they got me the second time. Because you were pregnant and alone. They isolated you systematically, convinced your family you were having a psychotic break, arranged for David's death to look accidental, then had you committed during a moment of grief-induced vulnerability. Maya felt rage building in her chest, not the helpless anger of the past 2 years, but something focused and purposeful. Her daughter deserved to know that justice had followed her birth, that the people who'd tried to erase her parents had faced consequences for their crimes. "I want to see the media," she announced, surprising everyone in the room. "Tonight, before they can craft their narrative about the mentally ill woman who imagined corporate conspiracies." "Maya," Dr. Kovac protested, "you've just given birth. You need rest." But Maya was already sitting up, her daughter still nestled against her chest. "They used my pregnancy against me, turned it into evidence of instability. Now I'm going to use it as proof that their victims can fight back and win." She looked directly at Agent Torres. How many other families are out there right now being torn apart by psychiatric commitments that serve corporate interests instead of medical ones? The final confrontation wasn't going to happen in a courtroom months from now. It was going to happen in the next few hours, with cameras rolling and the world watching as Maya Chen reclaimed not just her own story, but the stories of everyone the system had tried to silence. Her daughter stirred against her chest, and Maya felt the road back to herself becoming a path forward toward justice that would outlive them both. The final test. The press conference was chaos barely contained by hospital security, but Maya insisted on it happening exactly as she'd envisioned, not in some sterile corporate boardroom where the Foundation's lawyers could control the narrative, but in her hospital room with her newborn daughter visible to every camera. The optics were deliberate and devastating. A new mother, still wearing a hospital gown, holding the baby that powerful interests had tried to prevent from existing. "They want you to wait," Agent Torres said, reviewing the list of media outlets crowding the hallway. CNN, NPR, The Washington Post, 60 Minutes. "This is going to be national news within hours. Once you do this, there's no taking it back." Maya adjusted her daughter's blanket, feeling the weight of what she was about to unleash. "Good. I want it to be impossible to bury." The first wave of journalists entered with the careful reverence reserved for victims, but Maya immediately shattered that narrative. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a prosecutor presenting evidence that would reshape everything the public thought they knew about psychiatric medicine and corporate power. "My name is Maya Chen," she began, looking directly into the cameras. 48 hours ago, I was legally considered mentally incompetent, held against my will in a psychiatric facility, my pregnancy monitored by doctors who served corporate interests rather than medical ethics. Tonight, my daughter was born free because the legal trap I set 2 years ago finally triggered. The room went completely silent, except for camera shutters. Maya could see reporters recalibrating their prepared questions, realizing they weren't covering a rescue story but a calculated victory. "For 18 months, I've been told I was delusional for claiming that environmental contamination in Greymont, Massachusetts, was being covered up through fraudulent psychiatric commitments. Tonight, the FBI arrested Dr. Margaret Hartwell and 46 associates for exactly those crimes. The delusion was theirs, thinking they could make the truth disappear by making me disappear." A reporter from the Boston Globe raised her hand. "Miss Chen, how did you maintain your legal strategy while under psychiatric hold?" Maya smiled, shifting her daughter to a more comfortable position. "I didn't. My past self did. Before they could drug me into compliance, I established legal mechanisms that would activate automatically if I ever gave birth. My grandmother's trust wasn't just inheritance. It was a deadman switch designed to trigger federal investigations the moment my daughter arrived." The questions came faster now, but Maya had learned something crucial during her time in captivity: the power of controlling information flow. She answered only what served her larger purpose, redirecting every inquiry back to the systematic abuse that had been hiding behind medical authority. "The Hartwell Foundation didn't just target me," she continued. "They've been using psychiatric commitment as a weapon against environmental activists, whistleblowers, and anyone who threatened corporate clients. 47 people are getting independent psychiatric evaluations tonight because their commitments were based on politics rather than medicine." Her daughter began to fuss, and Maya's response was immediate and instinctive, the natural protectiveness that had driven every decision of the past 2 years. The cameras captured that moment of maternal care, and Maya realized it was the most powerful evidence she could present. She wasn't the unstable woman they'd tried to create. She was exactly who she'd always been. Miss Chen called a CNN correspondent. "What do you want people to understand about psychiatric abuse?" Maya looked down at her daughter, then back at the cameras. "I want them to understand that madness isn't always a medical condition. Sometimes it's a weapon. When you can convince the world that someone is mentally ill, you can take away their credibility, their freedom, their children, their entire existence. The Hartwell Foundation turned psychiatric medicine into a tool for silencing inconvenient truths." Dr. Kovac appeared in the doorway, concerned about the strain on Maya's recovery, but Maya waved her forward. "This is Dr. Sarah Kovac, who risked her career to help me expose this conspiracy. She represents what medical ethics actually looks like when it serves patients instead of profits." The energy in the room was shifting as reporters began to understand the scope of what they were witnessing. This wasn't just another corporate scandal. It was a revelation about how power operated in spaces most people considered sacred and trustworthy. "I have one more thing to say," Maya announced, standing despite Dr. Kovac's protests. Her daughter settled against her shoulder, small fingers gripping Maya's hospital gown. "My daughter's father was EPA investigator David Martinez, murdered for documenting environmental crimes that have killed 43 children in Greymont. She'll grow up knowing that justice was possible because people like her parents refused to be silenced." As the cameras captured that final image, Maya Chen and her newborn daughter, standing in defiance of everything that had tried to destroy them, Maya felt the completion of a transformation that had begun 2 years ago in a moment of apparent defeat. The woman who'd been dragged away to Millbrook was gone forever. In her place stood someone who had learned to weaponize her own apparent powerlessness. Her daughter's future was secure, but more importantly, the system that had tried to erase them both would never be able to operate in darkness again. The moment the last reporter left, Maya felt the adrenaline that had sustained her through the press conference begin to drain away. But instead of relief, a cold realization crept over her. Dr. Hartwell's voice echoing from the hallway, growing closer despite supposedly being in federal custody. "I told you she was delusional," came that familiar, patronizing tone. "Look at her now, convinced she's won some great victory when she's simply having another psychotic episode." Maya's blood turned to ice. Through the doorway, she could see Dr. Hartwell approaching with a team of orderlies, her white coat pristine, her smile that practiced blend of concern and condescension that had haunted Maya's nightmares for 2 years. "That's impossible," Dr. Kovac whispered, moving protectively between Maya and the door. "She was arrested. I saw—" "You saw what she needed you to see," Dr. Hartwell interrupted, entering the room with the casual authority of someone who'd never doubted her power. Poor Maya. Still mixing fantasy with reality, the press conference, the FBI raid, even the birth, all elaborate hallucinations. Though I must admit this episode has been remarkably detailed. Maya clutched her daughter closer, feeling the solid weight of the baby's body, hearing her tiny breathing. "No, you're lying. Agent Torres was here, the media, the arrests." Dr. Hartwell's voice carried that devastating gentleness reserved for the irretrievably lost. "You're in the Millbrook psychiatric ward. You've been here for 6 hours, ever since you collapsed during a supervised walk. Your pregnancy? Another delusion. You've been experiencing what we call a pseudocyesis, a phantom pregnancy brought on by severe psychological trauma." The room seemed to tilt. Maya looked down at her arms, expecting to see her daughter, but they were empty except for a worn hospital pillow she'd apparently been clutching. The weight she'd felt, the warmth, the tiny fingers, all gone. "No," Maya breathed. Then louder, "No, this is another one of your games, another manipulation." Dr. Hartwell nodded to the orderlies, who moved forward with practiced efficiency. "The delusions are becoming more complex, more resistant to reality testing. We'll need to adjust her medication levels significantly." But something in Dr. Hartwell's eyes, a flicker of uncertainty, a momentary break in her perfect composure, made Maya focus through the psychological assault. The doctor was too eager, too performative. This felt like the mirror room all over again, another test designed to make her doubt her own perceptions. "If this is all a hallucination," Maya said slowly, "then how do you explain this?" She pulled out her phone, not the tracking device the Foundation had given her, but her actual phone, still containing the legal documentation, the environmental evidence, the recorded conversations she'd been building for months. Dr. Hartwell's mask slipped for just an instant. Patients often incorporate random objects into their... "My grandmother's trust documents are still here," Maya continued, scrolling through files with shaking hands. "The EPA correspondence with David Martinez, the architectural plans showing the illegal waste disposal system, the audio recording I made of you admitting to fraudulent commitments." She hit play, and Dr. Hartwell's voice filled the room. The Chen woman was getting too close to exposing the Greymont operation. Psychiatric commitment was the cleanest solution. The recording continued for 30 seconds that felt like hours, detailing the conspiracy with clinical precision. When it ended, Dr. Hartwell's carefully constructed reality began visibly cracking. That's fabricated," the doctor stammered. But her orderlies were backing away, suddenly uncertain about their orders. Maya stood, her body still aching from recent childbirth, but her mind crystal clear. "You're not here to recommit me. You're here because I won, and this is your last desperate attempt to make me doubt it. But I know the difference between your lies and my truth now." Dr. Kovac stepped forward, her voice steady and professional. "Dr. Hartwell, you're under federal arrest. The marshals are waiting outside to escort you back to custody. This unauthorized visit violates your detention terms." Through the doorway, Maya could see the real law enforcement officers, not the Foundation's private security, but actual federal agents who served legal authority rather than corporate interests. Dr. Hartwell's composure finally shattered completely. "You think this changes anything? You think exposing one operation stops the system? There are dozens of facilities, hundreds of doctors, thousands of inconvenient people who need to be silenced. You've won one battle, not the war." "Maybe," Maya replied, watching as the federal marshals entered to reclaim their escaped prisoner. "But I've taught my daughter something more valuable than victory. I've shown her that even when you're powerless, even when they convince the world you're crazy, the truth doesn't disappear just because they lock it away." As Dr. Hartwell was led away in restraints, Maya felt the final confrontation, ending not with violence or dramatic revelation, but with something simpler and more powerful, the restoration of her own ability to distinguish between manipulation and reality. Her daughter's cry echoed from the nursery down the hall. Real, immediate, demanding attention from a mother who was finally free to provide it. Maya walked down the hospital corridor toward her daughter's cry, each step feeling like a choice between the life she'd reclaimed and the life she was about to sacrifice. The nursery door stood open, revealing her daughter in the clear plastic bassinet, small fists waving in the air with indignant hunger. As she lifted the baby, Agent Torres appeared beside her, tablet in hand, expression grim. "Maya, we need to discuss your testimony timeline. The federal prosecutors want to move fast. Preliminary hearings start in 3 weeks, full trial in 8 months. But there's a complication." Maya settled into the rocking chair, her daughter latching immediately, greedy for comfort after the chaos of the past hours. "What kind of complication?" "Dr. Hartwell's legal team is preparing an insanity defense. They're claiming she was manipulated by pharmaceutical companies, that she genuinely believed she was helping patients. Worse, they're going to argue that your testimony is unreliable due to your psychiatric history. The words hit Maya like a physical blow. Even in defeat, the system was weaponizing her supposed madness against her. So they're using my commitment to discredit my testimony about illegal commitments. Exactly. Which means to win this case, to ensure convictions that will actually dismantle their network. Agent Torres paused, clearly struggling with what she had to say next. You'll need to voluntarily undergo extensive psychiatric evaluation, independent doctors, multiple sessions, invasive questioning about every detail of your mental state. You'll have to prove your sanity by submitting to exactly the kind of scrutiny that traumatized you in the first place. Maya felt her daughter's small body relax as she nursed, trusting completely in her mother's ability to provide safety. The irony was devastating. To protect other families from psychiatric abuse, Maya would have to surrender herself to psychiatric examination. There's more, Agent Torres continued. The trial will be highly publicized. Every detail of your personal life, your relationship with David, your family history, your time at Millbrook, all of it will become public record. Your daughter will grow up with her birth story connected to one of the most notorious medical scandals in recent history. Dr. Kovac appeared in the doorway, having overheard the conversation. Maya, you don't have to do this. You've already exposed the conspiracy. Other victims can testify. But Maya was thinking of the 47 people getting independent evaluations tonight, of the families torn apart by fraudulent commitments, of the children who died from environmental contamination while their parents were being silenced in psychiatric wards. Her victory meant nothing if it didn't translate into systematic change. If I don't testify, Maya said slowly, if I protect my privacy and my daughter's future, what happens to their victims? Agent Torres's answer was brutally honest. Hartwell gets a reduced sentence. The Foundation's assets are frozen but not fully seized. The other facilities continue operating under new management, and the precedent that psychiatric commitment can be weaponized against activists remains intact. Maya looked down at her daughter, who had finished nursing and was now staring up with those unfocused newborn eyes that seemed to see everything and nothing. This child would inherit whatever world Maya's choices created in the next few minutes. The psychiatric evaluations, Maya asked, how intensive? 6 months minimum. Weekly sessions with court-appointed psychiatrists who'll be specifically looking for signs of delusional thinking, paranoid ideation, unreliable memory. They'll want to verify every detail of your story, test every aspect of your mental functioning. It's designed to be thorough enough that the defense can't claim bias. Maya felt something shift inside her chest, not the desperate determination that had driven her escape from Millbrook, but something sadder and more mature. Victory was requiring her to sacrifice the very thing she'd fought to reclaim, her right to privacy, to healing, to a normal life with her daughter. And if I refuse? The case becomes much weaker. Hartwell probably serves 5 years instead of life. The Foundation restructures and continues operations, and in 10 years we're investigating the same crimes with different names. Her daughter made a small sound, not quite crying, but a tiny protest that somehow contained everything Maya was feeling. The baby couldn't understand the choice her mother was facing, but she was already living with its consequences. Maya stood, moving to the window that overlooked the hospital parking lot, where news vans were still gathered. Tomorrow, those cameras would be documenting either a victory that would reshape psychiatric medicine or a missed opportunity that allowed institutional abuse to continue behind slightly different facades. I'll do the evaluations, Maya said quietly, not turning from the window. All of them, for as long as it takes. But I want something in return, a guarantee that every psychiatric facility in the country will be subject to random federal inspection, and a fund established for families destroyed by fraudulent commitments. Agent Torres nodded, already making notes. We can make that part of the plea negotiations. Maya kissed her daughter's forehead. understanding now that some victories could only be purchased with pieces of yourself. The woman who walked into that courtroom would be different from the one who'd escaped Millbrook, more exposed, more vulnerable, but carrying the power to ensure that other mothers wouldn't have to choose between their children and justice. The silence that followed Agent Torres's departure felt different from the quiet Maya had learned to fear at Millbrook. This was the silence of completion, heavy with the weight of decisions that couldn't be undone. Maya remained at the window, her daughter sleeping against her shoulder, watching the news vans begin their slow exodus from the parking lot. Dr. Kovac entered quietly, carrying a steaming cup of tea and settling into the chair beside the window. "How are you feeling about what you just agreed to?" Maya touched her daughter's tiny hand, marveling at how something so small could anchor her so completely to the present moment. Terrified, relieved, angry that I have to prove my sanity to people who'll never understand what they put me through. She paused, watching snow begin to fall beyond the glass, but mostly grateful that she'll grow up in a world where what happened to me is harder to hide. "The psychiatric evaluations won't be easy," Dr. Kovac said gently. "Even with independent doctors, the process is designed to be invasive. They'll question everything. Your memories, your perceptions, your emotional responses. It's going to feel like being back in that mirror room." Maya had been trying not to think about that aspect of her bargain with the federal prosecutors. 6 months of having her mental state dissected by strangers, of defending her grip on reality to people who'd never experienced institutional gaslighting. "Will you help me? Not as my doctor, but as someone who understands the difference between psychiatric treatment and psychiatric abuse?" "Of course." "And Maya," Dr. Kovac leaned forward, her expression serious, "what you're doing is going to save lives, not just the 47 people getting evaluations now, but countless future victims who'll be protected by the safeguards you're helping establish." Through the window, Maya could see the last news van pulling away, leaving behind tire tracks in the gathering snow. Tomorrow, the story would shift from breaking news to long-term investigation, but tonight felt like an ending of sorts, the completion of a journey that had begun 2 years ago with her desperate flight into the December storm. Her daughter stirred, making the soft sounds that preceded waking, and Maya found herself smiling despite everything. "Dr. Kovac, can I ask you something? When you first met me at Millbrook, did you believe I was delusional?" The older woman considered the question carefully. "I believed you were experiencing severe trauma that was manifesting in ways that looked like paranoid thinking. The difference was, I also believed your trauma had legitimate sources. Too many of my colleagues forget that just because someone displays symptoms of mental illness doesn't mean their fears are unfounded." Maya nodded, understanding something fundamental about her own recovery. The line between healing and justice hadn't been as clear as she'd expected. Exposing the conspiracy hadn't magically erased the real psychological damage she'd sustained, but it had given that damage meaning beyond personal suffering. "There's something else," Dr. Kovac continued. "The medical board is launching a comprehensive review of psychiatric commitment procedures nationwide. Your case has become the catalyst for reforms that advocacy groups have been pushing for decades. Sometimes change requires a perfect storm of evidence, publicity, and someone brave enough to sacrifice their privacy for a larger cause." Maya's daughter opened her eyes, focusing on her mother's face with that intense newborn concentration. In those dark eyes, Maya saw neither judgment nor expectation, just the pure need for protection and care that had driven every decision since her escape from Millbrook. "I keep thinking about my grandmother," Maya said softly. "How she designed that trust not just to protect her property, but to give me weapons I didn't even know I'd need. She understood that sometimes the only way to fight institutional power is to use their own systems against them." As if summoned by the mention of legacy, Maya felt the weight of what she was passing on to her daughter. Not just financial security or legal protections, but something more complex, the knowledge that survival sometimes required becoming someone you never intended to be. The hospital's evening quiet settled around them, broken only by distant conversations and the soft hum of medical equipment. Maya realized she was no longer listening for threats, no longer calculating escape routes or analyzing every interaction for signs of deception. The hypervigilance that had kept her alive was finally beginning to ease. "When do the psychiatric evaluations begin?" Maya asked. "Next week, if you're ready. We can schedule them around your daughter's feeding schedule. Make sure you're not separated for long periods." Maya stood, moving toward the bassinet where her daughter would sleep safely through the night, something that had seemed impossible just days ago. "I'm ready. Not because I'm not afraid, but because I understand now that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to act despite being terrified." As she settled her daughter into the bassinet, Maya felt the final pieces of her new identity clicking into place. The woman who would testify against Dr. Hartwell was neither the anxious architect who'd been committed 2 years ago, nor the desperate mother who'd escaped into the storm. She was something harder and more resilient, someone who'd learned that the truth, once spoken clearly enough, could reshape the world. The return. 6 months later, Maya stood in the courthouse hallway, her daughter strapped to her chest in a carrier, watching through tall windows as spring sunlight painted the marble floors in geometric patterns. The psychiatric evaluations were complete. 43 sessions with 6 different doctors who had dissected every aspect of her mental state with clinical precision. Their unanimous conclusion lay heavy in her hands, a 200-page report declaring her competent, credible, and psychologically stable. "Maya?" She turned to find her sister Jennifer approaching hesitantly, clutching a small gift bag. They hadn't spoken since before Millbrook, since the day Jennifer had signed the commitment papers that Dr. Hartwell had placed before her with such convincing urgency. Jenny. The name felt strange in Maya's mouth, weighted with 2 years of betrayal and months of gradual understanding that her sister had been as manipulated as anyone. "I know I don't have the right to ask for forgiveness," Jennifer began, her voice breaking slightly. "When I signed those papers, they told me you'd tried to hurt yourself, that you were having psychotic episodes about conspiracies that didn't exist. I thought I was saving your life." Maya studied her sister's face, older now, marked by guilt and sleepless nights. The woman who had escaped Millbrook would have felt nothing but rage, but the mother who had spent 6 months proving her sanity to skeptical doctors understood something more complex about how institutions weaponized love against families. "They were very convincing," Maya said quietly. "Dr. Hartwell specialized in making caring look like cruelty and cruelty look like care." Jennifer's tears came then, relief and grief mixing as she reached toward her niece. Is it okay if I hold her?" Maya lifted her daughter from the carrier, watching Jennifer's face transform as she cradled the baby. This was what the conspiracy had nearly destroyed, not just Maya's freedom, but the possibility of this moment. This simple human connection between sisters who had been turned against each other by calculated manipulation. "Her name is Hope," Maya said, and saw Jennifer's smile break through her tears. "Of course it is." They stood together in the courthouse corridor, 2 women rebuilding trust in the shadow of testimony that would soon dismantle an entire network of institutional abuse. Maya felt something loosening in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but the recognition that healing didn't require punishment, that families broken by outside forces could be repaired by inside choices. "The house," Jennifer said hesitantly. "I know it's yours now, legally, but I kept thinking, maybe we could share holidays there again, if you wanted family around?" Maya looked down at her daughter, who was staring up at Jennifer with that open newborn curiosity that seemed to judge nothing and accept everything. The Victorian house in Greymont stood empty now, its secrets exposed, but its rooms still holding 40 years of Christmas mornings and birthday celebrations. "She should know where she comes from," Maya agreed. "The real story, not the version they tried to write for us." Through the courtroom doors, Maya could hear the bailiff calling the session to order. In 30 minutes she would take the stand to testify against Dr. Hartwell. her words carrying the weight of every victim who had been silenced in psychiatric wards across the country. But this moment, reconciling with her sister, introducing her daughter to family she'd feared was lost forever, felt equally important. Agent Torres appeared beside them, tablet in hand as always. "Maya, they're ready for you. The defense team tried one final motion to exclude your testimony on psychiatric grounds, but the judge denied it. Your credibility evaluations were too thorough, too conclusive." Maya nodded, taking her daughter back from Jennifer and settling her into the carrier. The baby would stay with Dr. Kovac during testimony, but knowing Jennifer would be in the courtroom gallery created an anchor Maya hadn't expected to have. "I'll be right here," Jennifer promised. "Whatever happens in there, you're not facing it alone." As Maya walked toward the courtroom doors, she felt the final transformation completing itself. The architect who had been committed was gone, replaced by someone harder and more purposeful. The desperate mother who had escaped into the storm was also gone, transformed into someone who understood that survival meant more than just staying alive. It meant ensuring that the truth, once spoken, could never be buried again. Her daughter made a soft sound against her chest, and Maya realized she was no longer walking toward testimony as a victim seeking justice. She was walking forward as a mother shaping the world her child would inherit, using her voice to build safeguards into systems that had nearly destroyed them both. The courtroom doors opened before her, revealing cameras and reporters, and the machinery of justice that would finally hold institutional power accountable to human truth. Maya Chen stepped forward into that bright, unforgiving light, carrying her daughter toward a future she had fought to make possible. The new beginning. 2 years after her testimony sent Dr. Hartwell to federal prison and dismantled the Whitmore Foundation's network of psychiatric facilities, Maya Chen sat in the garden behind her grandmother's Victorian house, watching her daughter Hope take wobbling steps between the raised beds of vegetables. The child moved with fearless determination, arms outstretched for balance, completely trusting that the world would catch her if she fell. "Mama! Tomatoes!" Hope pointed excitedly at the cherry tomatoes Maya had planted in the spot where they'd once found the hidden surveillance equipment. The soil there grew things especially well now, as if secrets buried too long had finally decomposed into something nourishing. Maya smiled, gathering Hope into her lap as afternoon sunlight filtered through leaves that had witnessed 40 years of family history. The house felt different now. Not the shrine to childhood she'd discovered during her desperate escape, but a living space where past and present coexisted peacefully. The architectural blueprints that had once spread across the dining table like evidence of a stolen life now covered the walls of her new home office, where she designed affordable housing for families transitioning out of institutional care. "Maya?" Jennifer's voice called from the kitchen window. "The reporter from the Times is here for the interview." Maya kissed Hope's forehead, breathing in the scent of sunshine and baby shampoo that had become her anchor to the present moment. Today marked the 2nd anniversary of the Millbrook Exposé, and journalists still wanted to understand how one woman's escape into a December snowstorm had ultimately led to federal legislation requiring independent oversight of all psychiatric facilities. She carried Hope inside, where Jennifer was preparing lunch with the easy domesticity of someone who belonged here. Maya's sister had moved to Greymont 6 months ago, drawn by the possibility of helping raise her niece and the healing that came from rebuilding broken trust, one shared meal at a time. The custody papers and competency hearings that had once loomed so threateningly were distant memories now, replaced by the simple rhythms of family life. The reporter, a young woman named Sarah Kim, sat at the kitchen table with her recorder and notebook, but Maya noticed her attention kept drifting to Hope, who was demonstrating her newfound walking skills with proud determination. "Thank you for agreeing to this interview," Sarah began. "I know you've been reluctant to revisit the story." Maya settled Hope in her high chair with a handful of Cheerios, considering how to explain that she didn't avoid talking about Millbrook because it was too painful, but because the person who had lived through that experience felt increasingly distant from who she'd become. The woman who escaped from that psychiatric hospital was fighting for survival, Maya said slowly. I'm fighting for something different now, for systems that protect people instead of silencing them. It's related but not the same battle. Can you tell me about the reforms that have resulted from your case? Maya glanced at the federal monitoring report that had arrived that morning, documenting surprise inspections at psychiatric facilities nationwide. Forced medication rates had dropped by 60%. Patient advocacy programs had been established at every state hospital. Most importantly, the legal standard for involuntary commitment now required evidence beyond family testimony, the kind of evidence that would have protected Maya from ever being institutionalized. 47 people got independent psychiatric evaluations because of the federal investigation, Maya explained. 31 were released immediately when those evaluations found no grounds for commitment. The others received proper treatment instead of institutional warehousing. That's just the beginning. Hope banged her cup against the high-chair tray, demanding attention with the imperious confidence of a 2-year-old who had never known anything but security. Maya refilled the cup, marveling as always at her daughter's absolute trust that her needs would be met, her problems solved, her world kept safe. What do you want people to understand about psychiatric abuse? Maya considered the question, thinking of Dr. Kovac's recent letter describing the new trauma-informed protocols being implemented at hospitals across the country. Change was happening, but slowly, institution by institution, policy by policy. That the difference between treatment and abuse isn't always obvious from the outside, Maya said. My family thought they were protecting me, the nurses thought they were following proper procedures, the doctors thought they were treating mental illness. But none of them asked the right questions about who benefited from my silence. As the interview continued, Maya found herself describing not just the conspiracy she'd uncovered, but the quieter transformation that had followed. Learning to trust her own perceptions again, building a relationship with her sister despite their shared trauma, discovering that healing didn't require forgetting but rather integrating painful experiences into a larger understanding of resilience. Hope finished her lunch and reached for Maya with tomato-stained fingers, babbling in the complex language of toddlers that somehow communicated everything important. Maya lifted her daughter, feeling the solid weight of this small person who would grow up in a world slightly safer because of choices made in desperate moments. One more question, Sarah said, closing her notebook. Do you ever regret exposing everything? The loss of privacy, the public scrutiny? Maya looked around the kitchen, where she'd once hidden from surveillance cameras, now filled with afternoon light and the comfortable chaos of family life. Through the window, she could see the garden where Hope would learn to plant seeds and trust in seasons, the town beyond where neighbors had gradually stopped staring and started simply waving hello. Privacy is something you lose, Maya said finally, but purpose is something you choose. I chose to make sure other families wouldn't have to go through what we did. That choice gave everything else meaning. The reporter left as Hope's nap time arrived, and Maya carried her daughter upstairs to the bedroom that had once been preserved like a museum exhibit, but now served its intended purpose: shelter for the next generation. She settled Hope in the crib that Jennifer had assembled, watching her daughter's eyes grow heavy with the easy sleep of someone who had never known institutional walls or the sound of locks turning. Maya remained by the window as afternoon shadows lengthened across Greymont's quiet streets. Somewhere in the distance she could hear children playing, their voices carrying the timeless sound of summer freedom. Her own childhood echoes seemed to blend with those voices, no longer trapped in the past, but flowing naturally into the future her daughter would inherit. The woman who had escaped Millbrook had been desperate to reclaim her old life. The woman standing at this window had built something better, a new kind of security that couldn't be stolen by forged documents or manipulated by institutional power. She had learned that home wasn't a place you returned to, but a reality you created day by day, choice by careful choice. Hope stirred in her sleep, making the soft sounds of dreams Maya hoped were filled with tomato plants and afternoon sunshine and the unshakable knowledge that truth, once spoken clearly enough, could indeed reshape the world. Maya Chen closed the curtains gently and went downstairs to help her sister prepare dinner, carrying with her the quiet satisfaction of someone who had transformed survival into purpose, fear into wisdom, and the fragments of a broken life into something strong enough to shelter the future. Outside, evening settled over Greymont with the peaceful certainty of seasons changing, children growing, and justice, however slowly, being served.